You? $100 million? Don't make me laugh. The words didn't just land. They cut clean through the room, slicing past the soft clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of polite conversation like a blade no one saw coming. And just like that, everything shifted. The pianist in the corner didn't stop playing, but the melody felt thinner, weaker, as if even the music knew something had cracked. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the leather, a slow smile spreading across his face, the kind of smile that had closed billion-dollar deals and ended careers without a second thought. And across from him stood a 10-year-old girl in worn sneakers, her small frame almost swallowed by the polished elegance of Veritas House, a Manhattan restaurant where a single dinner could cost more than most people's monthly rent. Around them, suits worth 5 figures turned, watches glinted under warm amber light, and eyes followed the scene not out of concern, but curiosity, because in rooms like this, people didn't intervene, they observed. Monica Brooks stood just a step behind her daughter, her tray steady in her hands, though her fingers tightened ever so slightly around the edge, the only sign that something inside her had shifted. She had worked rooms like this for years, learned the unspoken rules, learned when to disappear, when to smile, when to swallow words that burned on the way down, but tonight felt different, heavier, like the air itself was watching. Ethan tapped the marble table lightly, the sound sharp and deliberate, drawing every last fragment of attention toward him as he leaned forward, eyes narrowing just enough to turn amusement into challenge. "Tell you what," he said, his voice smooth, controlled, carrying the weight of someone who was never questioned. "Win, and I'll wire you $100 million before dessert." A few quiet laughs rippled through the table, not loud, not kind, just enough to confirm what everyone already believed. This was a performance, and the outcome had already been decided. The girl didn't laugh. She didn't look at the people around her, or the polished floors, or the ceiling painted to mimic. A sky no one in the room had time to look at. She looked only at the table, at the board being set in front of her, at the pieces arranged like a language she had known long before she ever stepped into a place like this. "Lily," Monica whispered, barely audible, a warning wrapped in a name, but the girl reached back, just for a second, her fingers brushing her mother's hand in a gesture so small it almost disappeared in the space between them, and yet it carried something steady, something certain. Ethan noticed it. Of course he did. He noticed everything. And for a moment, just a moment, his smile shifted, not gone, but thinner, as if something unfamiliar had entered the equation. Then he waved a hand toward the board, dismissing the feeling as quickly as it came. "Go ahead," he said, leaning back again, reclaiming the room with ease. "Let's see what you've got." The pieces were set. The lights glowed warm. The room leaned in. And somewhere beneath the surface of polished marble and practiced laughter, something real, something no one had paid for, was about to begin. The first move did not come with hesitation. It came with stillness, the kind that settles before something important happens. And Lily reached forward with a calm that did not belong to a 10-year-old standing in a room built to intimidate grown adults. Her fingers light against the polished piece as she moved it without flair, without drama. Just a simple opening that drew no immediate reaction from the table except a faint smirk from Ethan, who exhaled through his nose, as if confirming what he already believed, that this would be quick, predictable, forgettable, and yet the room did not relax. Because something about the way she moved did not match the story everyone had already written in their heads. And across the table a man in a navy suit leaned slightly closer, his brow tightening just enough to suggest curiosity replacing amusement. Ethan responded almost instantly, his hand moving with practiced ease, a confident counter that spoke of years spent mastering control, not just on a board but in every space he occupied. And he did not look at Lily when he placed his piece. He looked at the people around him, as if reminding them who this moment belonged to. But Lily did not follow his gaze. She studied the board, her eyes tracing patterns invisible to most. And then she moved again, faster this time, not rushed but certain, like someone stepping onto a path they had already walked 100 times in their mind. A quiet shift passed through the table, subtle but undeniable, the kind that does not announce itself, but can be felt in the way conversations stop trying to restart, in the way glasses remain untouched, in the way attention sharpens without permission. Monica stood behind her, her posture straight, her breath measured, and though her expression remained composed, there was a memory flickering behind her eyes, one shaped by late nights and quiet sacrifices, by moments when the world was asleep and a small lamp cast just enough light for a child to read, to learn, to build something no one else could see yet. And she had watched it happen, piece by piece, never imagining it would unfold here, in front of people who had never bothered to look twice at her. Ethan's fingers paused for the first time, just above the board, not long enough for anyone to call it doubt, but long enough to register, and when he finally placed his next move, it came with less ease, less performance, as if something had shifted just beneath the surface, something he had not accounted for. Lily did not look up, not once. She did not search for approval or reaction. She simply played, each move connecting to the next with a quiet precision that began to draw the room inward, closer, tighter, until even the soft music in the background felt distant, like it belonged to another place entirely. Someone at the far end of the table leaned back slowly, arms crossing, eyes narrowing as they followed the board with growing interest, and another guest lowered his glass without realizing it, his attention no longer on the conversation he had been half engaged in moments before. The laughter that had once framed the moment was gone now, replaced by something quieter, something more focused, and Ethan felt it, even if he did not show it, the subtle transfer of attention, the way. The room was no longer orbiting him, but something smaller, something unexpected, something he had dismissed too quickly. Lily moved again, and this time, it was not just a move, it was a statement, one that did not need words, one that settled into the space between them with quiet confidence. And for the first time since the game began, Ethan looked directly at her, really looked, as if trying to understand what he was seeing, and in that brief moment of eye contact, something unspoken passed between them, not defiance, not arrogance, but clarity, the kind that does not ask for permission to exist, and the kind that cannot be undone once it has been seen. The room did not breathe the same anymore, not after that last move, not after the quiet certainty with which Lily had placed her piece, as if she was not reacting to the game but guiding it, and Ethan felt it settle into his chest, subtle but undeniable, the first real shift in control he had experienced in years, though his expression did not betray it, his posture still relaxed, his fingers still steady as they hovered above the board, calculating, recalibrating, searching for a line he could exploit, a weakness he could expose, because that was what he did, that was how he had built everything he owned, by finding the flaw others missed. But this time the flaw did not present itself so easily. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing not in arrogance now, but in focus, and for the first time he stopped performing for the room and began playing for himself, and when his hand finally moved, it was slower, more deliberate, a move designed not to dominate but to test, to probe, to see how deep this unexpected resistance really went. Lily watched without tension, her gaze steady, her breathing even, and when his piece settled into place she did not rush, she did not react outwardly at all, she simply studied, her mind moving faster than her hands ever would, mapping possibilities, tracing outcomes, and then she made her next move, quiet, clean, precise, and this time it was not just the board that shifted, it was the room. A man at the corner of the table leaned in further, his lips parting slightly as recognition flickered across his face, because he saw it now, the structure, the pattern, the way the game was unfolding not randomly but intentionally, and another guest straightened in his chair, his earlier amusement replaced by something closer to disbelief. Monica felt it too, not through the board but through the silence, the way it had deepened, thickened, become something that pressed against the walls, and her eyes moved from her daughter to Ethan, watching the smallest changes, the tightening of his jaw, the slight pause before his next move, the way his confidence was no longer effortless but constructed, maintained. Ethan placed his piece, but this time he did not lean back, he stayed forward, elbows near the table, eyes locked on the board, and when Lily responded almost immediately, his gaze snapped up, not fully, just enough to catch her expression, to search for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that would confirm this was still within his control, but he found none, only calm, only clarity, and something else, something he could not quite name but recognized instinctively as dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with money or reputation. The pieces continued to move, each exchange tightening the space between them, each decision narrowing the path forward, and the rhythm of the game changed, accelerating in quiet bursts, then slowing again, like a conversation that had shifted from polite to serious without anyone announcing it. Someone in the background exhaled softly, unaware they had been holding their breath, and another guest set his glass down with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have, because every other sound had faded into irrelevance. Lily moved again, and this time the implication was clear even to those who did not fully understand the game. A subtle but undeniable pressure building against Ethan's position, and he saw it. Of course he did, but seeing it and escaping it were not the same, and for the first time that night, the man who controlled everything in his world was being asked a question he could not immediately answer, and the room knew it before he did. Because power, when it shifts, does not need to be announced, it is felt. Time did not stop, but it slowed, stretching itself thin across the table as if even seconds were unsure where to land, and Ethan felt it in the way his next decision refused to come easily, not because he lacked options, but because every option now carried consequence. Every path led somewhere narrower than before, and he could see it, the tightening structure, the quiet trap forming not through aggression but through patience, something he was not used to encountering in rooms where people rushed to impress him, to please him, to fold under pressure before he ever had to apply it. His fingers hovered again, longer this time, and though he kept his face composed, the shift was visible to anyone paying attention, the difference between control and calculation, between certainty and effort, and across from him Lily remained still, her hands resting lightly near the edge of the table, her posture relaxed in a way that felt almost out of place, as if she were not standing in the center of a room full of power, but somewhere quieter, somewhere familiar. Monica watched the board now, not just her daughter, her eyes following the lines she had learned to recognize over the years, the patterns that once seemed abstract but had become something she could feel even without naming them. And she saw it. The narrowing space, the subtle pressure building not in one move, but across many, layered, patient, deliberate. Ethan finally placed his piece, a move designed to break the tension, to disrupt the pattern, to force a reaction, and for a moment it seemed to open the board, to create space where there had been none, and a few guests shifted in their seats, sensing the change, hoping perhaps that the balance had returned, that the story would correct itself back to what they expected, but Lily did not hesitate, not even for a breath, her hand moving forward with quiet precision as she answered immediately, closing the space he had just created, sealing it with a simplicity that made the move feel inevitable rather than impressive. A soft murmur passed through the table, not loud, not disruptive, but present, the sound of realization beginning to spread. And Ethan heard it. Even if he did not look away from the board, because he understood rooms, he understood people, he understood how quickly perception could shift when something unexpected refused to disappear. He leaned back slightly, just for a second, creating distance not from the game but from the moment, as if giving himself space to reset, and his eyes lifted briefly, scanning the faces around him, measuring what they saw, what they believed, before returning to the board with a sharper focus, a quieter intensity. Lily adjusted her stance just enough to remain comfortable, her weight shifting lightly from one foot to the other, her gaze never leaving the pieces, and there was no urgency in her, no need to rush or prove, only the steady continuation of something she trusted completely. The next few moves came faster, not careless, but fluid, the rhythm changing again as the game entered a new phase, one where the outcome was no longer shaped by broad strategy, but by precision, by small decisions that carried larger weight, and with each exchange the room leaned in further, drawn not by spectacle but by clarity, by the unfolding of something they had not expected to witness. Ethan's jaw tightened just slightly as he recognized the position forming in front of him, the kind that did not collapse dramatically but closed quietly, step by step, until there was nowhere left to go, and for the first time that night, the man who had offered everything as a joke began to understand that this moment was no longer his to control, and the realization did not arrive with noise or shock. It arrived in silence, the kind that speaks louder than anything else. The next move did not come immediately, and that alone was enough to shift everything again, because hesitation, even the smallest kind, did not belong to Ethan Caldwell, not in rooms like this, not in front of people who had built their expectations around his certainty. And yet there it was, subtle but visible, his hand resting near the edge of the board, fingers no longer hovering with effortless confidence, but grounded, still, as if weighing something heavier than a simple decision. The room felt it before anyone acknowledged it, the quiet stretch of time where nothing happened and everything changed, and a man seated 2 chairs away leaned forward just a fraction more, his eyes fixed not on Ethan now, but on the board, on the pattern unfolding in front of him like something he could almost understand but not quite articulate. Lily stood exactly as she had before, unchanged, unhurried, her focus anchored to the pieces with a calm that did not bend under attention, and if she noticed the shift in the room, she did not show it, because for her, this was not about the people watching. It was about the sequence, the logic, the quiet certainty that each move carried forward. Monica felt her heartbeat in her chest, steady but present, a reminder of how much rested in this moment, not in the money, not in the outcome others might measure, but in what this represented, in the line her daughter had crossed simply by stepping forward and refusing to shrink. And she did not speak, she did not move, she only watched, her eyes moving between the board and the man who had created this moment without understanding what he had set in motion. Ethan finally acted, his hand reaching out with renewed intent, placing his piece with precision, not as a reaction but as a statement, an attempt to reclaim rhythm, to push the game into territory he understood, and for a brief second, it worked. The structure shifted, the pressure eased just enough to draw a quiet exhale from someone at the far end of the table. But Lily answered immediately, her response not forceful, not dramatic, but exact, closing the space he had opened with a simplicity that made the move feel inevitable, as if it had always been there waiting for him to see it. A soft sound escaped from someone in the room, not quite a word, more a recognition, and Ethan heard it, even if he did not look up, because he could feel the change in attention, the way the room had tilted, no longer centered around him, but around something smaller, something he had underestimated. His jaw tightened slightly, the first visible sign that this was no longer unfolding according to plan, and he leaned in again, closer to the board now, his world narrowing to the 64 squares in front of him, every other detail fading into the background, because this was where he fought, this was where he solved problems, and yet the problem in front of him did not behave the way he expected. The pieces continued to move, each exchange sharpening the position, reducing options, tightening control, and with every passing second, the path forward became clearer to those who understood what they were seeing, and even to those who did not. Something undeniable was happening, something that did not need explanation to be felt. Lily made another move, and this time it landed with quiet finality, not ending the game, but defining it, drawing a line that could not be ignored, and Ethan saw it instantly, his eyes locking onto the board as the realization settled in, slow but certain, and for a moment, he did not move at all, because the answer he was looking for was no longer there, and the room, once filled with quiet laughter and casual confidence, now held something entirely different, something sharper, something real, something that could not be bought, and in that silence, the balance of power completed its shift. It was no longer about finding a move. It was about accepting what had already happened, and Ethan knew it, even if he had not yet allowed himself to say it out loud, because the board in front of him had stopped offering choices and had started offering consequences, each square now a quiet reminder of how the game had narrowed, how the space he once controlled had been reduced piece by piece without noise, without spectacle, until only one path remained, and even that path did not lead to victory. His fingers lifted slightly from the table, then settled again, not reaching this time, not searching, just resting as if the act of moving had lost its meaning. And for a brief moment, he looked up, not at the crowd, not at the room, but at Lily, really looked at her, not as a participant in a game, not as part of the setting he had orchestrated, but as the center of something he had not understood when it began. She met his gaze without challenge, without triumph, her expression unchanged, steady, grounded, as if this moment did not elevate her, but simply confirmed something she had always known, and that quiet certainty unsettled him more than any bold display ever could. Around them, the room had gone completely still. No shifting chairs, no whispered comments, no polite laughter left to soften the edges. Only attention, focused and unbroken, because everyone present understood, even without naming it, that they were witnessing something irreversible, something that could not be undone once it had been seen. Monica felt the shift fully now, not just in the room but in the air itself. The weight of years carried silently into a single moment, and she did not step forward, did not interrupt, because this was not hers to claim. It belonged to the girl who stood in front of her, the girl who had walked into a space that was never built for her and had reshaped it without raising her voice. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, and his eyes returned to the board one last time, tracing the lines, confirming what he already knew, not searching for escape but acknowledging the structure as it stood. And then, with a motion that carried more weight than any move he had made all night, he leaned back in his chair, creating distance not from the game, but from the illusion that he still controlled it. "Go on," he said quietly, his voice no longer carrying the sharp edge it had before, no longer performing for anyone, just stating what the moment required. And Lily did not hesitate. She stepped forward and placed the final piece with the same calm precision that had defined every move before it. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just exact, and the meaning settled instantly, not because it needed explanation, but because it was undeniable. A breath moved through the room. Not a reaction, not applause, just a release, the kind that comes when tension resolves into truth. And Ethan remained still for a second longer, his eyes fixed on the board, then lifting slowly, not with resistance, not with denial, but with something quieter, something closer to recognition, as if he had just encountered a reality that existed long before he noticed it. Lily stepped back, her hands returning to her sides, her posture unchanged, and she did not look around, did not seek validation, because the moment was already complete, and in the silence that followed, the meaning of everything that had just happened became clear without a single word being spoken. For a moment, no one moved, not even the servers passing quietly along the edges of the room, because what had just happened did not fit into the rhythm people expected from a place like this. And when expectations break, even the smallest actions feel uncertain, as if the room itself is waiting for permission to continue. Ethan remained seated, his gaze still resting on the board, but no longer analyzing, no longer calculating, just observing, as if the pattern in front of him had shifted from something to solve into something to understand. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, his posture changed, the tension leaving his shoulders, replaced by something quieter, something more grounded. He looked up again, this time not scanning the room, not measuring reactions, but focusing on Lily with a clarity that had not been there before. And when he spoke, his voice carried none of the sharp confidence from earlier, none of the performative edge, only a calm acknowledgement that settled into the space between them. "That was not luck," he said, not asking, not challenging, just stating what had become obvious to everyone present. Lily did not respond immediately, not because she did not have an answer, but because she did not need one, her silence holding more weight than any explanation could have. And after a second, she simply nodded once, a small, quiet motion that confirmed everything without adding anything unnecessary. A murmur moved through the room, softer than before, more respectful, less like commentary and more like recognition, and one by one, people began to shift in their seats, not away from the moment, but into it, as if adjusting to a new understanding of what they had just witnessed. Monica felt it too, the difference in the way eyes landed on her now, no longer sliding past, no longer dismissive, but present, attentive, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeper, not in relief, but in quiet acknowledgement of what had changed, not just for this night, but in a way that would not easily reverse. Ethan leaned forward again, but this time without urgency, without pressure, his hands resting lightly on the table as he looked at the board one last time, then back at Lily, and there was something different in his expression now, something that did not come from winning or losing, but from seeing, truly seeing, what had been in front of him all along. "You knew this line before we started," he said, more to himself than to her, and Lily's eyes softened just slightly, not in pride, not in triumph, but in understanding, because she had, not from this moment, but from countless quiet ones before it, moments no one in this room had witnessed, moments that did not come with applause or attention. The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy, no longer tense. It had changed into something else, something clearer, something that allowed space rather than closing it. And Ethan exhaled once more, slower this time, before leaning back fully in his chair, not reclaiming the room, but releasing it, letting it exist without him at the center. 100 million, he said quietly, almost as if testing the words again, not as a joke this time, not as a challenge, but as a statement of what had been placed on the table and what it now meant. And for the first time that night, the number did not feel like power. It felt like a question, one that could no longer be answered the way he originally intended. No one reached for a glass, no one checked a phone, no one even pretended the moment had passed, because it had not. It had only changed shape, settling into something that demanded to be understood, and Ethan could feel it pressing against him now, not as pressure from the room, but from within, a quiet insistence that this was not something he could brush aside or reframe into a story that favored him. He rested his hands flat on the table, fingers spread slightly, grounding himself in the reality of what had just unfolded, and for the first time that night, the man who had built his life on control allowed a pause to exist without filling it, without bending it back into his direction. His eyes moved from the board to Monica, and that shift alone carried weight, because earlier, she had not existed in his line of sight, not as someone worth addressing, not as someone connected to the moment in any meaningful way, but now he saw her, not as background, not as service, but as part of something he had underestimated completely. Monica held his gaze for a second, steady but not confrontational, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, and in that brief exchange, something passed between them, not forgiveness, not accusation, but recognition, the kind that does not need words to define it. Ethan nodded once, a small movement, almost private, before his attention returned to Lily, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, quieter, more deliberate, as if each word now had to earn its place. "You played 10 moves ahead," he said, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement, and Lily tilted her head just slightly, considering, before answering in a voice that matched her presence, calm and clear. "I played what made sense," she said, and the simplicity of it landed harder than anything else that had been said all night, because it stripped away the idea of spectacle, of performance, and left only truth, something the room was not used to handling without decoration. A few people shifted again, but not out of discomfort, out of adjustment, as if recalibrating how they saw not just the game, but the people standing in front of them, and one man at the far end let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, not mocking, not dismissive, but surprised, like he had just realized something he should have known all along. Ethan leaned back slowly, his chair settling against the floor with a soft sound, and his eyes moved once more across the table, not searching for approval, not reclaiming attention, but acknowledging the space as it was now, changed, redefined, no longer structured around his expectations. "The offer stands," he said after a moment, his voice steady, carrying clearly without force, and a ripple moved through the room again, not loud, not chaotic, but present, because now the words meant something entirely different than they had before, no longer a joke, no longer a test, but a commitment placed in full view of people who understood exactly what it represented. Lily did not react immediately, and that pause, small as it was, drew every eye back to her, not because she demanded attention, but because she held it without effort, and Monica felt her breath catch just slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was being placed in front of them, something far larger than the moment itself. Lily looked at the board one last time, then up at Ethan, her expression unchanged, and in that quiet space between offer and response, the room leaned in once more, not to see who would win, but to understand what mattered next. The silence stretched just long enough to become a presence of its own, not empty, not uncertain, but full of meaning waiting to be claimed, and every eye in the room stayed fixed on Lily, not because they expected hesitation, but because they sensed that whatever came next would define more than just the outcome of a game. She did not rush to answer, did not glance at her mother for guidance, did not shift her weight or break her calm. And in that stillness, she held something far stronger than attention. She held control, not the loud kind that demands recognition, but the quiet kind that earns it. Ethan remained exactly where he was, watching her, not with impatience, not with expectation, but with a level of focus that had replaced everything else. And for the first time that night, he was not trying to shape the moment. He was waiting for it to unfold without him. Monica felt the weight of the room settle around them, not pressing, not threatening, but present, as if every person there understood that this decision was not about money, not really. And she did not interrupt, did not step in, because she knew her daughter well enough to trust what would come next. Lily finally spoke, her voice steady, clear, carrying just enough to reach the edges of the table without forcing its way there. "I did not play for the money," she said, and the words landed softly, but their impact moved through the room like something far stronger, because they shifted the meaning of everything that had been placed on the table. A few people exchanged glances, not confused, but recalibrating, adjusting their understanding of what they had just witnessed, and Ethan's expression changed again, not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough for those paying attention to see that something inside him had shifted in response. Lily continued, not with urgency, not with emotion, but with the same calm logic that had guided every move she made. "You made it a game," she said, her eyes meeting his without challenge. "But I already knew how it would end." There was no arrogance in her tone, no attempt to elevate herself, only clarity, and that clarity settled into the room with a weight that no amount of money could match. Ethan let out a slow breath, not in frustration, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, and he nodded once, a small motion that carried more sincerity than anything he had offered earlier. The number still hung in the air, $100 million, but it no longer defined the moment. It had become secondary, almost irrelevant compared to what had just been revealed. Lily stepped back slightly, not retreating, just creating space, her hands resting naturally at her sides, and she looked at the board once more before lifting her gaze again, as if closing a chapter only she had been fully aware of from the beginning. Around them, the room began to shift again, not back to what it had been, but forward into something quieter, more grounded. Conversation still paused, attention still focused, but now shaped by respect rather than curiosity. Ethan leaned forward just enough to rest his forearms on the table, his posture no longer commanding, no longer performative, but present, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something new, something earned in the space of a few minutes that had undone years of assumption. "Then what did you play for?" he asked, not as a challenge, not as a test, but as a genuine question, and for the first time that night, the answer he was about to receive was not one he could anticipate, and the room knew it, because this moment was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about showing him what he had never thought to ask. The question did not echo, but it lingered, settling into the space between them with a quiet weight that demanded something honest in return, and Lily did not look away, did not shift under it, because it was not a question she needed to think about. It was one she had already answered long before she stepped into this room. She tilted her head just slightly, her eyes steady on Ethan, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same calm clarity that had guided every move she made. "I played because you thought it was a joke," she said, and the simplicity of it landed deeper than anything more complicated could have, because it exposed the truth at the center of everything that had just happened, not as an accusation, not as an attack, but as a fact that could not be softened or reworded. The room absorbed it in silence, not tense, not uncomfortable, but attentive, as if everyone present understood that this was no longer about a game. It was about perspective, about what had been overlooked and why. Lily continued, not louder, not sharper, just steady. "You made it about money," she said, "but it was never about money." Her words moved through the room with a quiet certainty, and a few heads nodded almost imperceptibly, not in agreement with her, but in recognition of something they had all seen, but not named. Ethan held her gaze, not interrupting, not redirecting, because for once, he was not leading the conversation, he was listening, and the shift in that alone changed the way the moment felt. Lily glanced down at the board for a second, not to check it, not to reconsider, but as if acknowledging the path that had brought them here. And when she looked back up, there was something softer in her expression, not less certain, but more complete. "I played because I knew you would underestimate me," she said, and there was no pride in it, no satisfaction, only clarity, and that clarity carried more weight than any celebration ever could. A quiet breath moved through the room again, not as a reaction, but as a release, because what she had said did not just apply to Ethan, it applied to everyone who had watched without stepping in, everyone who had assumed the outcome before the first move was made. Monica felt it settle in her chest, not as vindication, not as triumph, but as something deeper, something that had been building for years in moments no one else had noticed, and she allowed herself a small exhale, her shoulders relaxing just enough to show that something inside her had shifted as well. Ethan leaned back slightly, his eyes still on Lily, and for the first time, there was no attempt to reclaim the narrative, no effort to reshape what had been said into something more comfortable. He simply accepted it, and in that acceptance, something about him changed, not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough to alter the way he held himself in the space. "You are right," he said after a moment, his voice even, without resistance, and the acknowledgement landed differently than any apology could have, because it did not try to undo what had happened, it simply recognized it. The number, the offer, the entire setup of the moment now felt distant, like something from a different version of the night, and yet it still existed, still waiting, still unresolved in a way that required action, not just understanding. Ethan glanced briefly at Monica again, then back at Lily, and when he spoke next, there was no trace of the man who had started this, only someone who had just been shown something he could not ignore. "Then let me ask you this," he said quietly. "What would make it matter?" And the question hung there, not as a test, not as a challenge, but as an opening, and for the first time, the answer was not about winning or losing, it was about what came after. The question did not rush her, and that was what made it different. It was not thrown like a challenge or wrapped in expectation. It was offered, open and unguarded, and Lily could feel that shift, the absence of pressure, the presence of something real, and she took a small breath, not because she needed time, but because she understood that what she said next would not just answer him, it would shape everything that followed. She looked at Ethan steadily, then past him for just a moment, her eyes brushing over the room, over the faces that had watched, judged, assumed, and then returned to him, grounded again. "Make it mean something for someone who does not get a seat at this table," she said, her voice calm, but carrying further this time, not louder, just clearer, and the words settled into the room in a way that felt different from anything before, not sharp, not cutting, but expansive, as if they had opened a space no one had considered. A few people shifted in their seats, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful, the kind of movement that comes when something unexpected lands in a place you did not know was empty. Ethan did not respond immediately, and for once, it was not hesitation, it was consideration, real and unfiltered, and his eyes held hers as if measuring the weight of what she had just said, not in dollars, not in scale, but in meaning. Monica felt something rise quietly in her chest, not pride in the loud sense, not the kind that demands to be seen, but something steadier, something rooted in years of watching her daughter grow into a voice that did not need permission to exist, and she stood a little straighter, not for the room, not for anyone else, but for herself. Lily continued, not filling the silence, but shaping it. "There are kids who study like I do," she said, "but no one notices, because they are not supposed to be here." And she gestured slightly, not dramatic, just enough to indicate the space around them, the polished surfaces, the quiet luxury, the unspoken boundaries that defined who belonged and who did not. "If it is just money, it disappears," she added, her eyes returning to Ethan. "But if it changes who gets seen, then it matters." The room did not react in noise, it reacted in stillness, the kind that deepens when people recognize something true, and even those who did not fully understand the structure of the game understood this, because it was not about the board anymore, it was about the space it had revealed. Ethan leaned forward slowly, his hands coming together, fingers interlacing as he rested them on the table, and there was no performance in the movement, no attempt to reclaim control, only presence. And when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that had not been there before. "You are asking for more than a prize," he said, Not dismissive, not questioning, just stating what he now understood, and Lily nodded once, a small, certain motion. "I am asking you to see it differently," she replied, and the simplicity of that request held more power than any demand ever could. Ethan exhaled quietly, his gaze lowering for a brief moment to the board, then lifting again, and in that small movement, something settled, something aligned, as if a decision had been made not in response to pressure, but in response to clarity, and the room, still and attentive, felt it before he said anything at all. The decision did not arrive with a dramatic gesture or a raised voice. It arrived quietly, settling into Ethan the same way the realization had earlier, steady and undeniable, and when he finally moved, it was not to reclaim the moment, but to respond to it with something that matched its weight. He straightened slightly in his chair, not with authority, but with intention, and his eyes moved from Lily to Monica and then across the room, acknowledging the space in a way he had not done before, as if seeing it not as a stage, but as a shared moment that now carried responsibility. "Then it will not be a prize," he said, his voice calm, measured, each word placed carefully, not for effect, but for meaning, and the room leaned in again, not out of anticipation, but out of respect for what was being shaped in real time. "It will be a program," he continued, his gaze returning to Lily, steady, present, one that finds students who are overlooked, who do not have access to rooms like this, and gives them the same chance to be seen. The words did not echo loudly, but they carried, moving through the room with a clarity that replaced the earlier tension with something more grounded, something constructive, and a few people shifted again, this time not adjusting to discomfort, but to possibility. Monica felt her breath catch just slightly, not from surprise, but from the way the moment had evolved into something larger than she had imagined, and she watched her daughter closely, not to guide her, but to witness how she would receive it. Lily remained still for a second, her eyes on Ethan, not searching for flaws, not questioning intent, but measuring the sincerity in what he had just offered, and after a quiet pause, she nodded once, the same small, certain motion that had defined her presence from the beginning. "Then it matters," she said, and the simplicity of her response carried more weight than approval, because it confirmed that the shift was real, that the moment had not been reduced back into something transactional. Ethan exhaled slowly, a subtle release of something he had carried into the night without realizing it, and he leaned forward just enough to rest his hands on the table again, not as a gesture of control, but of engagement. "You will help design it," he added, his voice steady, directed not just at Lily, but at Monica as well, and for the first time, his attention held them both equally, not as roles, not as positions in a hierarchy, but as people connected to what had just been created. Monica blinked once, the only visible sign that the weight of that statement had reached her, and she straightened slightly, not out of obligation, but out of recognition that she was now part of something she had never been invited into before. Around them, the room began to breathe again, but differently. Conversations did not rush back in, laughter did not fill the space. Instead, there was a quiet shift, a collective understanding that something meaningful had replaced what had once been casual and dismissive. A man at the far end of the table nodded slowly. Another leaned back with a thoughtful expression, and the energy in the room no longer revolved around spectacle, but around substance. Lily stepped back beside her mother, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, and she did not look around for reaction or acknowledgement, because the moment had already reached its conclusion in the way that mattered. Ethan glanced at the board one last time, then away, not needing it anymore, because what had begun as a game had transformed into something else entirely, something that extended beyond the table, beyond the room. And in that quiet space where everything had shifted, the meaning of the night settled into place without needing to be spoken again. The room did not return to what it had been, because some moments do not allow that. They change the shape of everything that follows. And as the quiet began to soften into movement again, it carried a different tone, one that no longer revolved around status or spectacle, but around something far more grounded. Conversations resumed slowly, not with the same casual ease, but with a kind of awareness that had not been there before, and people who once spoke over one another now chose their words more carefully, as if the space itself demanded it. Ethan remained seated for a moment longer, not because he needed time, but because he understood that leaving too quickly would reduce what had just happened into something smaller than it was. And when he finally stood, it was without urgency, without performance, just a simple motion that carried quiet intention. He looked at Monica again, meeting her eyes directly, and there was no trace of dismissal left in his expression, only recognition, and he gave a small nod, not formal, not rehearsed, but genuine, before turning his attention back to Lily. "We will begin tomorrow," he said, his voice steady, not announcing, not declaring, just committing, and the words did not need to be louder to carry meaning, because everyone in the room understood that this was no longer about a promise made in passing. It was about something that had already taken root. Lily nodded once, the same calm acknowledgement she had offered all night, and she did not step forward, did not reach for anything more, because she had already taken what mattered, not the money, not the attention, but the shift itself. Monica placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, a quiet connection that spoke without words, and together they turned slightly, not rushing away, not lingering for recognition, simply moving as they always had, steady, composed, grounded in something that did not depend on the room around them. A few people watched them go, not out of curiosity anymore, but with a kind of respect that had replaced earlier assumptions, and even those who said nothing felt it, the difference between seeing someone and truly recognizing them. Ethan remained where he was, his gaze following them for a brief moment before returning to the table, to the board that had started it all, and he did not touch the pieces, did not reset them, because the game did not need to be replayed. Its outcome had already extended far beyond the squares it occupied. He exhaled quietly, a small release that carried with it the weight of understanding, and for the first time that night, the room was not something he owned, it was something he had learned from. The lights remained warm, the music returned to its gentle rhythm, but everything felt different, not louder, not brighter, just clearer, as if the surface had been stripped away to reveal something more real beneath it. And in that quiet clarity, the meaning of the night settled into place, not as a victory or a loss, but as a lesson that did not need to be spoken again, because it had already been seen. She did not argue. She did not boast. She changed what the moment meant, and in doing so, she changed what came after, leaving behind something that no amount of money could replace, and something no one in that room would forget.